The last distress call had gone out 18 cycles ago. Counselor stood at the main window of station and watched the enemy fleet spread across the stars like a dark stain. 200 warships hung in the void. They moved slowly, taking their time. They knew no one was coming to help. Was old. He had served his people for 40 years. He had seen wars and plagues and disasters, but he had never felt hope die the way it died now, watching those ships close in around his world. Prime floated below the station, a beautiful world of blue oceans and green continents. 47 million people lived down there. Families, children, farmers and teachers and artists, all of them looking up at the sky and waiting for death. The Galactic Conquered had received their distress call, knew this because he had sent it himself. He had begged, he had pleaded, he had reminded them of old treaties and promises of protection. They had sent back a message saying they wished to remain neutral. The collective had expressed their deep sympathy. The unified territories had released a formal statement of concern and promised to review the situation. No ships came, no help arrived. The galaxy watched and did nothing. They did not take prisoners. This was known throughout the stars. They were harvesters. They came to worlds and stripped them bare. They took the minerals and the water and the organic matter. They left behind only glass and ash and silence. No survivors, no mercy, no exceptions. Turned away from the window, his command center was quiet. The officers at their stations had stopped working. There was nothing left to do. Some of them were crying. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. A young communications officer had her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Military commander stood near the tactical display. The screen showed the enemy fleet in red dots surrounding them completely. There was no escape route, no gap in their formation. Had already said goodbye to his wife and daughter on the surface. He had told them he loved them. He had told them to stay together at the end. 20 hours. That was how long they had before the bombardment began. They liked to wait. They liked to let their prey understand what was coming. It was part of their cruelty. Walked to his chair and sat down heavily. His bones ached. His heart ached worse. He had failed his people, not through any fault of his own, but he had failed them all the same. He could not protect them. He could not save them. All he could do was die with them. The sensor technician made a small sound, looked up. The young male was staring at his screen with wide eyes. His hands were shaking. "Counselor," he said, his voice was barely a whisper. "There is something. I am detecting a subspace ripple." Felt nothing, more ships probably, coming to watch the slaughter. "It is coming from the old transit corridor," the technician continued. "The one that has been dead for 30 years. No one uses it anymore." Now felt something. Confusion. The old corridor led to distant human space. It had been abandoned decades ago when the humans built newer and faster routes. Why would anyone come from there? The ripple grew stronger. The technician's hands flew across his controls. "One ship," he reported. "Just one it is. It is human, Counselor." The command center went silent. Everyone turned to look at the sensor display. A single green dot appeared at the edge of the screen, emerging from the dead corridor. One ship against 200. Stood up slowly. His old legs trembled beneath him. He did not understand. The humans were far away. They had their own problems. They had no treaties with the no obligations. Why would they send a ship? Why would they send only one? "Show me," he ordered. The main screen flickered and changed. The image that appeared made take a step backward. The ship was wrong. He had seen human vessels before. They were bright and clean and covered in colorful markings. They bristled with technology and pride. The humans were a young species, but they built beautiful ships. This ship was not beautiful, it was dark. Its hull was black with scorch marks and carbon scoring. Great gouges ran along its sides like some massive beast had tried to tear it apart. Entire sections looked melted or burned. It did not broadcast any identification signals. It did not announce itself. It simply moved forward, slow and steady, like a ghost drifting through the void. The fleet noticed it too, watched as 20 enemy warships turned toward the newcomer, weapons powered up, targeting systems locked on. Demands for identification were broadcast on all frequencies. The human ship did not respond. It kept coming. Commander moved to stand beside. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "What are they doing?" Shook his head. He had no answers. Then his communications officer looked up. Tears still wet on her face, but now there was something else in her eyes. Something that might have been hope. "Counselor," she said, "we are receiving a transmission. Audio only. It is coming from the human ship." "Let me hear it." The speakers crackled with static. Then a voice came through. Human, female. It sounded tired beyond measure. The voice of someone who had not slept in days, who had not rested in years. "Station, this is Captain Myra of the UFS Remembrance. We heard your call." The voice paused, could hear labored breathing. He could hear pain and exhaustion and something else, something hard as iron. "We are what remains of the 7th Expeditionary Fleet. We have been fighting our way home for 11 years. 11 years. Felt cold spread through his body. What had happened to them? What could possibly keep a ship fighting for 11 years? "They destroyed our colonies in the Terminus Reach," Captain continued. 42 worlds. We could not save them. We were alone. No one came to help us." Her voice changed. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was wrapped in something dark and terrible. A promise, a threat. "But we learned how to kill, and we are very, very good at it now." The transmission ended. The command center was silent. Every eye was fixed on the dark ship moving toward the enemy fleet, one ship against 200. But looked at the scars on that hull. He looked at the darkness of it, the wrongness of it, and he understood that this ship had already faced death more times than anyone could count. For the first time in 18 cycles, he felt something stir in his chest. It might have been hope. The fleet commander was named Overseer Vol. He was a large creature, bloated and confident. He had conquered 19 worlds for the Dominion. He had never lost a battle. When his sensors showed him the human ship, he laughed. One vessel, damaged and moving toward his fleet of 200 warships. It was suicide. It was comedy. The humans had always been an arrogant species, but this was something new. Vol ordered his communications officer to demand the ship surrender. The human vessel did not respond. It kept moving forward, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the universe. On station, Counselor waited. His officers watched the sensor displays with growing confusion. Why did the humans not answer? Why did they not turn back? Did they not see what they faced? Then a new transmission came through. Not voice this time, but data. The Remembrance was sending its logs, mission records, sensor data, video files, 11 years of history compressed and transmitted to the station. "They want us to see," Commander said quietly. "They want us to understand." Ordered the files displayed on the main screen. What he saw changed everything he thought he knew about humans. The first images were from 11 years ago. The 7th Expeditionary Fleet leaving Earth orbit, 47 ships bright and proud. Their hulls shone with fresh paint. Their crews smiled and waved at the cameras. They were going to the Terminus Reach, the far edge of human territory, a routine patrol mission, nothing dangerous. Then the came. The Terminus Reach was far from Earth, very far. The humans had built colonies there because they were explorers. They wanted to see what was beyond the next star. They did not know that they had claimed that space long ago. They did not send warnings. They did not negotiate. They simply arrived with their fleets and began harvesting. Harvest Station fell first. Watched the video footage in horror. A space station full of civilians, families with children. Evacuation pods launched desperately, trying to escape. Fighters used them for target practice. They shot them down one by one like a game. The Seventh Fleet tried to respond. They sent distress calls to Earth, but Earth was too far away. Help would take months to arrive. The Galactic Concord was asked to intervene. They sent statements of concern. They debated in their councils. They did nothing. 42 human colonies burned. Millions of people died. The Seventh Fleet fought back, but they were outnumbered and ship after ship was destroyed. Captain took command when the original fleet commander died at the Battle of Meridian Colony. She was not supposed to be a leader. She was the chief engineer of the Remembrance. But when the captain died and the first officer died and the tactical commander died, she was the one who stood up. She was the one who refused to give up. The logs showed the transformation. It happened slowly over months and years. The humans stopped painting their ships. What was the point? The bright colors just made them easier targets. They covered their hulls with dark materials, with carbon and ash from burned worlds. They became shadows. They stopped playing music in their mess halls. The songs reminded them of home, of places that no longer existed. The silence was easier. They learned from their enemy. They captured ships and took them apart piece by piece. They studied weapons and found ways to turn them against their makers. They discovered weaknesses that no one else knew about. The reactors had a flaw. A certain frequency could cause cascade failures. The humans built weapons that could exploit this. The communication systems could be jammed in a way that made their hive ships attack each other. The humans learned how to do this too. They became ghosts. They hid in dead zones and asteroid fields. They struck fast and disappeared before they could respond. They killed and killed and killed. Watched footage of a command ship exploding, then another, then another. The humans were not fighting a war. They were conducting an execution, patient, methodical, endless. 3 hive commanders tried to surrender to the Seventh Fleet. They offered local ceasefires. They begged for peace. Their own dominion executed them for cowardice. The logs showed the funerals. At first there were ceremonies, speeches, tears, flags draped over empty coffins because there were no bodies to recover. The crew gathered to mourn their dead. As the years passed, the funerals grew shorter. There were too many dead. There was no time. Eventually, there were no ceremonies at all. The dead were simply noted. Their names were etched into metal plates and welded to the walls of the ship. A record, a promise, a reminder. The Remembrance was the last of 47 ships. Its crew had started at 4,200. Now there were 318. Some of them were not from the original roster. They were survivors from other ships, other stations, other worlds. Humans and aliens who had been pulled from the wreckage and given a home on the ship of the dead. The final log entry was recorded just before the Remembrance entered the old transit corridor. Captain sat in her command chair. Her face was thin and pale. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of years without proper sleep. Her uniform was patched and worn. She looked into the camera and spoke. "We detected a distress call from Prime. They are there. They have asked the galaxy for help. No one is coming." She paused, her jaw tightened. "We know what that feels like. We know what it is to call into the void and hear nothing but silence. We know what it is to watch your world burn while the galaxy debates and discusses and does nothing." She leaned forward. "We are 3 days from Earth, 3 days from home. We have been fighting for 11 years. We are tired. We are broken. We want to see our families. We want to rest." Her eyes hardened. "But we cannot rest while others suffer what we suffered. We cannot go home while innocents die. They are at Prime, so that is where we will go." She stood up. Behind her, her bridge crew watched in silence. Men and women who had lost everything. Humans and aliens bound together by grief and rage and purpose. "We do not know if we will survive this battle. We do not know if we can win. But we know that we must try. Because if we do not, then what was all this death for? What was the point of surviving?" She reached out and touched something off camera. A wall of names, perhaps, a memorial to the fallen. We carry them with us, the dead, the lost, the forgotten. We carry their silence and their ash, and we will not let their sacrifice mean nothing. The log ended, the screen went dark. Counselor realized he was crying. He was not alone. Every officer in the command center had tears on their face. They had asked for help and received none. But these humans, these broken and battered survivors, had heard their call and answered. Not because they had to. Because they remembered what it felt like to be alone. Captain Myra stood on the bridge of the Remembrance and watched the fleet grow larger on her screen. 200 warships, each one capable of destroying a city in minutes. She had faced worse odds before. She had survived them, but only just. Her bridge crew worked in silence. There was no chatter, no nervous jokes, no music playing softly in the background. Those things had died years ago, along with so many friends. Now there was only the hum of the engines and the quiet beeping of consoles. Lieutenant sat at the tactical station. He had been a cook before the war. Now he could calculate firing solutions faster than anyone in the fleet. His hands moved across his controls with practiced ease. Ensign Mora handled communications. She was not human. She was a refugee from one of the colonies that had destroyed. She had lost her entire family. The humans had pulled her from a dying escape pod and given her a reason to live. Revenge. Commander stood at side. He was her first officer now, though he had started the war as a junior engineer. Everyone who outranked him was dead. That was true for most of the crew. "They are hailing us," Ensign Mora reported. Her voice was flat and calm. "They are demanding our surrender." Almost smiled, almost put them through. The main screen flickered. Overseer Val appeared, his bloated face twisted in amusement. He looked at her with the confident superiority of a predator facing prey. "Human ship," he said, his voice thick and wet. "You are one vessel against my fleet of 200. This is foolish even for your species. Surrender now and I will make your deaths quick." Studied him. She had killed many commanders over the years. They all had the same arrogance, the same belief that numbers were everything. They never understood what they faced until it was too late. "Overseer Val," she said slowly, "I know who you are. I have your file. You commanded the assault on Harvest Station 11 years ago." Something flickered in the overseer's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. "You ordered your fighters to use our evacuation pods for target practice," continued. Her voice did not rise. It stayed flat and cold like ice. "There were children in those pods, families trying to escape. You killed them for sport." Val recovered his confidence. "I remember. They made satisfying explosions. Your species screamed so entertainingly." Behind, Lieutenant's hands tightened on his console. Commander took a slow breath. The bridge crew said nothing, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I thought you might remember," said. "We remember too. We remember every world you burned, every station you destroyed, every person you killed." She stepped closer to the screen. "You thought we were finished 11 years ago. You thought you had broken us. You were wrong." Val laughed, a wet gurgling sound. "You are one damaged ship. What can you possibly do against my fleet?" "Let me tell you what we have done," said. "In 11 years, the 7th Fleet has destroyed 847 warships. We have killed 12 overseers. We have burned 6 supply stations to ash." The laughter died in Val's throat. His eyes widened slightly. "You may check your records," continued. "Look up the ships that vanished in the Terminus Reach, the convoys that disappeared, the commanders who stopped reporting. That was us. All of it." Val's confidence cracked. She could see him processing this information, checking his databases, realizing the truth. "We did not come here to negotiate," said. "We did not come here to surrender. We came here to kill you, personally, for what you did at Harvest Station, for every child in every pod you destroyed." She turned away from the screen. "All weapons free, begin the attack." Ensign Mora cut the transmission. Lieutenant activated the firing systems. The Remembrance surged forward, engines burning bright. And it was not alone. From the subspace wake behind the human ship, more vessels emerged. They had been hidden in the distortion of the old transit corridor, masked by the Remembrance's damaged reactor signature. 19 ships appeared, one after another. They were not like any warships had seen before. They were small and fast, cobbled together from salvage and wreckage. Some were human designs, others were clearly alien. A few looked like they had been built from the broken pieces of vessels. They were ugly. They were mismatched. They looked like they should fall apart if someone breathed on them too hard. But they moved together with perfect coordination. They spread out in attack formations that did not recognize. They accelerated toward the fleet with the speed of hunting animals. "Who are they?" Commander whispered. The answer came through the communication channel, not from Captain but from dozens of voices speaking at once. Humans, from other fallen worlds, survivors, even a handful of defectors who had abandoned their dominion. They called themselves the Fleet of the Lost. They were refugees and survivors and orphans, gathered from 100 different tragedies. The humans had found them drifting in space, hiding in asteroid fields, waiting to die. The humans had given them ships and weapons and a purpose. Not a fleet in any official sense, not a military force, just a pack of wolves, hungry and angry and led by a ship made of silence and ash. Overseer Vol screamed orders at his fleet. 200 warships turned to face this unexpected attack, weapons powered up, shields activated. They were still confident. 20 ships against 200. The numbers were still on their side. They did not understand. The first warship exploded, then another, then 3 more. The humans were not firing blindly. They were targeting specific systems with surgical precision. Reactors overloaded. Power systems failed. Ships that should have been able to fight for hours died in seconds. Captain watched from her bridge. Her face showed no emotion. This was not victory for her. This was work. This was the job she had been doing for 11 years. "Focus fire on the command ships," she ordered. "Disable their communications first. Let them feel what it is like to call for help and receive no answer." The battle continued. The fleet, for the first time in its long history, began to panic. Their formations broke apart. Their ships scattered. They had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that knew all their weaknesses. An enemy that had spent 11 years learning how to kill them. On station, Counselor watched in amazement. He had expected to die today. He had expected to watch his world burn. Instead, he watched the burn. The humans had come carrying silence and ash, and they had brought death for his enemies. The battle raged for 3 hours. The void around Prime filled with fire and debris. Warships died by the dozen, their reactors exploding in brilliant flashes of light. The Fleet of the Lost moved through them like ghosts, striking and vanishing, reappearing where the enemy did not expect. Captain commanded from the bridge of the Remembrance. Her orders were calm and precise. She had fought 100 battles like this. She knew the rhythm of war. She knew when to push and when to pull back. She knew how to make the enemy afraid. They were afraid now, could see it on the tactical display. Their formations had collapsed. Ships fired wildly, sometimes hitting each other. Commanders screamed contradictory orders. They had never faced anything like the humans before. Overseer Vol tried to rally his fleet. He broadcast commands and threats. He promised rewards for killing the human captain. He promised punishment for cowardice. But his words fell on deaf ears. His captains were too busy trying to survive. The Remembrance took damage. Watched as weapons struck its hull, tearing new wounds in metal that was already covered in scars. But the ship kept fighting. It absorbed hits that should have destroyed it and kept moving forward. "How are they still alive?" Commander asked quietly. That ship should have died 100 times by now. Shook his head. He had no answer. The humans had built their ship to survive. They had reinforced it and modified it and filled it with systems that no one else understood. It was more fortress than warship now, a moving monument to stubborn refusal to die. 5 hours into the battle, the tide turned completely. The fleet had lost more than half its ships. The survivors were scattered and desperate. Some tried to flee, but the fleet of the lost ran them down. Others tried to surrender, but the humans did not accept surrenders. Not after Harvest Station. Only one ship still fought with any real purpose. Overseer Val's flagship, the largest vessel in the fleet. It hung in the center of the chaos, surrounded by the last of its escort ships, firing at anything that came close. Captain studied the flagship on her screen. Her eyes were dark and focused. This was the ship that had led the assault on Harvest Station. This was where the order had been given to kill those children. She had waited 11 years for this moment. "Commander," she said quietly, "prepare a boarding party." Looked at her, his face showed no surprise. He had known this moment would come. "Captain, our boarding teams are exhausted. We have less than 50 combat-ready personnel." "I know. The flagship will have hundreds of warriors aboard." "I know." Nodded slowly. "I will lead the team." No said, "I will." The bridge fell silent. Every officer turned to look at their captain. She was the leader, the heart of the fleet. If she died, everything they had built would fall apart. Lieutenant spoke first. "Captain, you cannot risk yourself. You are too important." Turned to face him. Her expression was gentle but firm. The people at Harvest Station were important too. The children in those pods were important. Every person they killed was important. She paused. "I promised myself 11 years ago that I would look Val in the eyes when he died. I intend to keep that promise." No one argued further. They understood. This was not about tactics or strategy. This was about justice, about a debt that had been waiting 11 years to be paid. The boarding shuttle launched from the Remembrance's hangar bay. 31 humans crammed inside, armed with weapons they had built themselves from salvaged technology. Captain sat at the front, checking her rifle one last time. She did not feel afraid. She had stopped feeling fear years ago. There was only purpose now, only the mission, only the promise she had made to the dead. The shuttle punched through the flagship's weakened shields and crashed into its hull. The humans poured out before the dust settled, moving with the precision of soldiers who had done this 100 times before. Warriors met them in the corridors. The fighting was brutal and close. Energy weapons flashed in the darkness. Bodies fell on both sides. The humans pushed forward step by step, leaving a trail of dead behind them. Led from the front, she did not hide behind her soldiers. She fought beside them, rifle in her hands, face splattered with blood. She was not a general anymore. She was a weapon, a force of nature, an instrument of revenge. The corridors of the flagship were dark and twisted. They smelled of chemicals and death. The humans had studied ships like this before. They knew the layout. They knew where the command center would be. 4 hours of fighting, room by room, corridor by corridor. The humans lost people along the way, good people, brave people. Their names would be added to the walls of the remembrance if any of them survived to write them. When finally reached the command center, only 19 humans remained. They breached the doors with explosive charges and poured inside, weapons firing. Overseer Val stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his personal guard. He was larger than had expected. His bloated body was covered in ceremonial armor. His small eyes burned with hatred and fear. The fight was short. The guards fell one by one. Soon only Val remained, backed into a corner, wounded and bleeding. Approached him slowly. She lowered her rifle. She wanted to see his face clearly. "Do you remember Harvest Station?" she asked. Val spat at her. "I remember weak prey. I remember easy kills, your species is nothing, you are insects. Shook her head. We were farmers and teachers and engineers. We were families. We were children playing in parks and old people watching sunsets. We were everything that makes life worth living. She stepped closer. You tried to harvest us. You tried to make us into nothing, but we survived. We learned. We became something new. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal plate. A name was etched into it. Sarah, her daughter, 7 years old, killed at Harvest Station when a fighter shot down her evacuation pod. This is for her, said quietly, and for everyone else you murdered. What happened next in that command center was never recorded. The surviving humans did not speak of it. When they emerged 4 hours later, there were only 19 of them left. Their faces were blank. Their uniforms were soaked in blood. Val was dead. That was all anyone needed to know. The battle ended soon after. Without their overseer, without their flagship, the remaining ships surrendered or fled. The fleet of the Lost let them go. They had killed enough today. The survivors would carry the story back to the Dominion. The humans had come. The humans had won. And they would never forget. The Battle of Prime lasted 6 hours from start to finish. When it ended, more than 150 warships were destroyed or disabled. The rest had fled into the darkness between stars, carrying tales of horror back to their dominion. Prime was saved. 47 million lives pulled back from the edge of extinction. Counselor stood at the window of station and looked at the debris field that surrounded his world. Broken ships and scattered wreckage drifted slowly through the void. The remains of an army that had come to kill his people. The remembrance floated among the debris, its dark hull even more than before. Fires still burned in some sections. Repair crews worked frantically to keep the ship alive, but it had survived. Somehow, impossibly, it had survived. The fleet of the Lost had gathered around it. The 19 ships that had emerged from hiding were now 15. 4 had been destroyed in the battle. Their crews were dead, their sacrifices added to the long list of names that the humans carried with them. They did not know how to respond. They sent messages of gratitude. They offered supplies and fuel and repairs. They wanted to give the humans everything they had, to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid. Captain accepted their help graciously. She thanked them for their kindness, but she did not celebrate. None of the humans celebrated. They worked in silence, repairing their ships, tending to their wounded, counting their dead. On the 3rd day after the battle, Counselor requested permission to visit the remembrance. He wanted to thank Captain personally. He wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who had saved his world. The shuttle that carried him to the human ship was quiet. His guards sat in nervous silence. They had heard stories about what the humans had become during their 11 years of war. They were not sure what to expect. The hangar bay of the remembrance was dark and cold. Scorch marks covered the walls. Equipment was piled in corners, salvaged from destroyed ships and enemy vessels. Nothing was wasted here. Everything had a purpose. Commander met at the entrance. His face was tired but polite. He led the counselor through the ship without speaking. The corridors were narrow and dim. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and orange. Crew members moved past them without looking up, focused on their tasks. They walked like people who had forgotten how to rest. Then saw the walls. At first he thought they were decorated with metal panels. Then he looked closer and saw the names. Thousands of names, tens of thousands, etched into metal plates that covered every surface, floor to ceiling, stretching down corridor after corridor. He stopped walking, his breath caught in his chest. "These are the dead," said quietly. "Everyone we lost in 11 years. Humans, others. Everyone who died so that we could keep fighting." Reached out and touched one of the plates. The metal was cold under his fingers. Each name represented a life, a story, a person who had laughed and loved and dreamed of a future they would never see. "How do you carry this?" he whispered. "How do you keep going with all this weight?" Was silent for a moment. "We carry them because someone must. We keep going because stopping would mean they died for nothing." He led onward, through more corridors lined with more names. Finally, they reached the bridge. Captain stood at the center, studying reports on a. She looked up when they entered. Had expected to see a warrior, a fierce and terrible leader who had conquered impossible odds. Instead, he saw a tired woman, small and thin, with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes. She looked like she had not slept in days, perhaps weeks. But her eyes were something else, deep and dark and filled with a strength that words could not describe. The eyes of someone who had seen too much and refused to look away. "Counselor," she said, her voice was hoarse, "thank you for coming." Bowed his head. "Thank you, Captain. You saved my world. You saved 47 million lives. There are no words to express our gratitude." Nodded slowly. "We did what had to be done." "But why?" asked. The question had burned in him since the moment the human ship appeared. "You had no obligation to us. No treaties, no agreements. You were 3 days from Earth, 3 days from home. Why did you stop here?" Set down her. She walked to the wall of the bridge where more names were etched into metal. She placed her hand on one of them. "Because no one came for us," she said quietly. "Because we sent our distress calls and heard nothing but silence. Because we watched our worlds burn while the galaxy debated and discussed and did nothing." She turned to face him. "When we heard your call, we remembered. We remembered what it felt like to be alone, to be abandoned, to know that death was coming and no one cared enough to help." Her voice grew firmer. "We could not save ourselves from that feeling, but we could save you. We could make sure that someone answered, that someone came, that you knew you were not alone in the universe." Felt tears running down his face. He did not try to stop them. "If we do not answer when others call," continued, "then what was the point of surviving? What was all this death for, just to keep living? That is not enough. That will never be enough." She gestured at the walls around them. "We carry silence and ash. We carry the memory of everyone we lost. And we swore that we would never let others suffer what we suffered, not if we could help, not if we could make a difference." The remembrance left Prime 3 days later. The humans were finally going home. 11 years of war finally ending. Earth was waiting for them, families, friends, a world they had not seen in over a decade. But before they left, Counselor made a promise. He stood in the council chamber of station and spoke to his people. "The humans came when no one else would," he said. "They answered when we were alone. We will never forget this. And when others call for help, we will answer too. This is our debt. This is our honor." They built a statue in their capital city. It showed a human woman standing against a tide of darkness, one hand raised in defiance. Her face was tired but determined. Her eyes looked toward the horizon. The plaque beneath it read, "They came carrying silence and ash and gave us tomorrow." Across the galaxy, other species heard the story of Prime. They heard how a single battered ship had answered a call that everyone else ignored. They heard how humans had fought for 11 years, carrying their dead with them, refusing to give up. And somewhere in the void, other distress calls echoed. Other worlds faced extinction. Other species begged for help that would not come. The humans heard them. And the humans answered. Because that was what they had become. Not conquerors, not warriors, something stranger and more terrible. A species that remembered what it felt like to be alone. A species that carried silence and ash. A species that would never let others face the darkness alone.